Welcome. We're learning the Sikha of Acharei Aleph, a Sikha that was originally said on Vov Tishrei Tavshin Lamed Aleph, the 6th yard site of the Rebbe's mother, Rebbe Tzimchana. And it's a juicy Sikha. It's a famous, one of the classic Sikhas. And as I was learning the Sikha, I was like, I'm sure there's a background, there's a context. You know, some Rashi Sikhas, you open up the Toras Menachem, there's no context. But over here, there's lots of context. And let's go into it and see what the Rebbe said in the original Farbrengen, which could enrich the way we learn the Sikha. So, in general, when the Rebbe would have a Farbrengen on the yard site, he would often start with the Siyum. And because the Sikha is a Siyum, a Maseches Yuma, and the Rebbe says in the Dach, it's Vov Tishrei, so we're 4 days before Yom Kippur, and we're in the Shivas Yom Kodem Yom Kippurim, which is what the whole thing that we talk about, that you have to isolate, and bases Ishtay, etc. So it connects to the time that we're in Vov Tishrei. And a very interesting point that the Rebbe brings, I never saw it before. The Rebbe says, B'chlal, you should know that Tshuva has 3 things. Number 1, to stay away from doing things that are loisaseh. Number 2, tshuva on the things that you should have done and you didn't do. Basically, that's a mitzvah saseh. And then there's the shleimus ha'avodah k'deboy le'lemeved, the way you should have done it. And that includes the general concept of yelchu mechayil l'chol, that each one of us has to grow. So the Rebbe says that we find this idea tshuva in the pasuk sur meira asi toiv and bakesh shalom. Bakesh shalom is search for shleimus. So that's the way the Rebbe introduces the concept, and then the Rebbe starts saying the haddan maseches yoma. And the Rebbe, as we know, explains the sikha. He starts off by in the original. He starts off by explaining the Mishnah Chreina, Amar Rabbi Kiva, Shleichem Yisrael. Remember, it's a siyum, not a schola. Although the sikh is built as a schola, then a siyum, originally it was a siyum, etc., etc. Now, interesting, the Rebbe was talking about in the sikha bein adam lachaverit and mitzvahs navedas bein adam lamakim. Says the Rebbe like this in the footnote, which means it didn't make it into the edited version, but the Rebbe said originally. It's important to know that Aveir shebein adam lachaveda are also within the category of bein adam lamakim. Why? It's possible to have an Aveir bein adam lamakim that won't be bein adam lachaveda, but you cannot have an Aveir that's adam lachaveda that won't be bein adam lamakim. Because if it's an Aveira, it's bein adam lamakim. Leisignov, leisachmai, the Rebbe says, is part of Vayidaber Likim is called Vermeil, part of Zediblis. Taka, if the Torah was not given, the Gemara tells us in Eruvin, we would have learned modesty from a cat and stealing from a worm, etc. But after Torah was given, you have to stay away from gezel, not because the animal doesn't, but because the Eibishter said. So much so that the Rambam says even b'nei goyim that they have to keep the shemitz b'nei noach, not because of the logic, but rather tziva ben HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'Torah. So that says, it's interesting, we divide Yiddishkeit to bein adam lachaveda, bein adam lamakom, but bein adam lachaveda is bein adam lamakom. And then the Rebbe obviously talks about the beginning of the Masechta, Maskin lo isha cheres, etc. And then the Rebbe starts explaining that the nafkemina, if, as we learned at the beginning of the Sikha, is it a shleimus in the Kohen Gadol or is the shleimus in Avodah? And then, as we learned, the Rebbe says there's a nafkemina to halacha regarding certain things that you would do any day, everywhere. Anyway, so the Rebbe in the footnote says over there, why do I have to bring a nafkemina to halacha? Because otherwise, it's the Rebbe says shpolten ahar. We're just making a difference between is it in the gavda or in the chefza of Yom Kippur, but we're not actually making any practical difference. And making chakilis for the sake of chakilis is no point. But if it has a halachic application, then, as the Rebbe says, that's the way the Dagat learned, that then it's relevant, and then we kach in it. The Rebbe talks about basis ishtoi, and the Rebbe says, interesting, when he talks about, it says beisai, it doesn't say ishtoi, but we know for a fact it's ishtoi, and not bnei beisai, because you have to be maskinun le isha acheres, isha without children. You don't have to have a wife with children so that, like, in other words, if Chas v'Shalom the wife dies and you get another wife, you don't need a wife with children. You don't have to have a child. That's not the chiyuv. The chiyuv is basic dafka zu ishtay. And meyamei lekarisi el ishti beisi. He saw in his wife the tachlis, the hiladas banim, and it's nagia to the shleimus meilus adam kol mishein leibayis einei adam. And the Rebbe says, interesting, the statement kol mishein leibayis einei adam. It's kadev levada. It's certain, almost certain, that's a maimed azal, and that it comes from originally midrashi chazal that were in the times of the Rishonim and never came to us. And the Rebbe says there are other things that Maimori Chazal that never came to us. For example, al tikle mechaya ela mahava, the Tanya Shar Yichad V'Amunah, so Perek Beis brings, and in the beginning of Tanya Perek Beis, Kamashikosa b'Zoyar man the nafach mitarfei nafach, we never see it anywhere. We never found in the Zohar Shalafanenu. So there are many things that traditionally we have, but we never found the Makar. And the end of the Masechta, that the message is that's not Mitzad Mailus Hayom, but rather Mitzad Mailus Yistovas, like the Elich HaMayim Tehoidim, not only Yom Kippur. But this pasuk is talking about Bisman Agula, a Statzin like Yom Kippur. And therefore the pasuk says, Mikvi Yisrael Hashem, even in the time that's not a Statzin. As the Rebbe says, and Rabbi Kiva lived in a time that wasn't a Statzin, he lived in the time of Galus. And he was killed by the Romans. Batza Bilti Ratzah. But the pasuk edition was Zarakti, Hazah, and not Tvila, the Tar Thomas Hames. It's because the incredible connection with Hashem in the Yidden. And therefore, Kadosh Baruch Hu Matar Satmeim, even when we have a bit of Tumah, we still stayed over a bit Tumah. Says the Rebbe, so now we can understand the big excitement that Rabbi Kiva said, Ashreichem Yisrael, says the Rebbe Chois nicht verstanden. What's the big kiddush? The gewaltig of the big accomplishment, Mi metar eschem avichem shema shamayim. Shafilu b'midas basar v'dam. The Rebbe says, what do you mean? What's the big kiddush? Even the basar v'dam, you're supposed to forgive. So if the Yid is asking the Eibush for forgiveness, the Eibush has to forgive. He expects us to do it. Says the Rebbe, no, because the kiddush is that the Eibush is metar satmeim. We're not doing a full apology. We're still in the mind of the matzav of ungeklapt. And still the Eibishter is mitayed. Then the Rebbe connects the point to the Shaykhus, to the Hadlan, to the Farbrengen of that day. Isha b'Yisrael, as we mentioned, that this is the Rebbe's mother's yard site, and basically Ishtoi, etc. And the Rebbe says, interesting, this focus is also on Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva was the one that said, Ashteichem Yisrael, and who built up Rabbi Kiva? Famous story, his wife, Rachel. Very interessant. So, and then Rebbe connects it to Rosh Hashanah, Chana, and Aser Simei Tshuva. But that's the background of the Sikha, very, very Geshmaka Sikha, with incredible lessons that each and every one of us can unpack.